he is not part of these 12 people. He is the brother, like Mary and um, Mary's son, like James. Okay, but if you see this book, he even starts with something like James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations. So even though he is a brother of Jesus Christ, he never claims that superiority. As you see, like he even mentions that he is a servant of God and Lord Jesus Christ. So with that we can understand how a humble person, like what kind of humility these people had among compared to other people. He has that superiority of saying that, hey, I'm brother of Jesus Christ, but he never mentions that. And also we see that I'm just trying to give some background on this, James, right? So even though you consider this an epistle, this is literally not an epistle kind of thing, right? So reason I'm saying is that Martin Luther King, even when with this reformation that we had, he had issues with four of these New Testament books. If you are aware, when I say issues, he won't consider them, like he kind of categorized these New Testament books in two levels, like two tiers, like first tier and second tier. And he keeps these four books as second tier books, actually, where he doesn't see a much of value in these books with respect to doctrine. Okay, so I mean, none of these books are out of value or like no value kind of thing, but in his opinion he had these some kind of uh, you know uh, I would say understanding of these books. They don't project much of a doctrine. Let's say if you look at this James, right, entirely he would have mentioned about Jesus Christ only twice, like maybe on the first chapter and second chapter. He would not have mentioned about Jesus Christ and other aspects, and also the core values of Christianity about resurrection and even Christ coming in the form of humanity. These core values also he would not have mentioned in this book. So with that perception, he had this issue, right, with James, Jude, and Hebrews and Revelation. So these four books, Martin Luther King used to consider it as the second tier books, where he doesn't see much value on these books. But maybe if you read through, you will understand. Again, it is his opinion, right? At the end, he also mentions that if somebody contradicts, has a different opinion, it is up to them. This is my personal opinion. That's what he says. Okay, but I think to understand this book, what he is trying to say, why he is writing this book, we need to understand the aspect, like it is written to whom it is written. Okay, this is not clearly a letter that is written in a response to something. If you look at Corinthians or something else, right, or Paul would have written that letter in response to something. There were some questions asked to him. He would have written in addressing those things. Okay, but if you look at James, you won't find that kind of pattern. Like you won't find a link of things. Okay, it is more like Proverbs or this Ecclesiastes, where you don't see a pattern. Okay, some first verse would be talking about something, and second verse somewhere else. Like it shifts the gears. Like it's out of nowhere, you'll get something else. Okay, even if you read James, that's the same pattern you would find. You will find these more of these proverbs. Okay, why is it written in such a way is that, as I mentioned, it is not a letter written in a response to something or to address some situation. These are more like a longer conversations that James had with all the believers, or maybe the wise thoughts that he had provided. So at one point of time, he wanted to document all those things to the people who are being persecuted. Okay, if you read that, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations. So what he wanted to do is like, hey, if you also need to understand Acts chapter 15, I'll just read it out for you. Acts chapter 15, if you see, there was a all discussion about these Gentiles being, believing Jesus Christ, and Paul and Barnabas were teaching gospel to the Gentiles. There was a big dispute on these first century, elders. And if you look at Acts chapter 15, verse 30, right? Uh, so Paul and Barnabas explains what they were actually, all the miracles that's happening between Gentiles, where Peter actually addresses that. Yes, he talks about the dream that he got about Gentiles, where Jesus wanted to give it to the everybody, not only Israelites, right? So after Peter, James would be the person who will actually tell everybody that, hey, that's the right thing to do. If you read, the whole assembly became silent as they listened to Barnabas and Paul, blah, blah, blah. 13, when they finished, James spoke up. Brothers, he said, listen to me. Simon has described to us how God first intervened to choose people of his from his name from the Gentiles. So if you look at this, on 19th verse, it is my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. Instead, we should write to them, telling them to abstain from food polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from the meat of strangled animals, so like so on. So if you see, there is a value given for the words that were spoken by James, or even for the decisions that were spoken by James. So after Peter, James was able to certify that the ministry or the Christianity is not only for Israelites, it's for the entire Gentiles. And after that, if you see, people were actually would accept that, and they will write a letter to Gentiles asking like, this is what you need to do, you have to follow so and so, all those things, right? So what we need to understand is like, he is one of the wisest persons at that point of time who was trying to advise the first century believers. Okay, so when he is giving these advices, and also there would have been some debates about some particular points that was happening, so he wanted to document those things so that we don't lose that aspect. So it is not a typical letter written, but it is a documentary of some discussions or wise thoughts that James had given. And he, as a second mention, I mentioned that it is written to the people who are persecuted. So as you understand, it was written in 62 AC or somewhere even before James was martyred, right? So it was given to the people where people were scattered because of all the persecutions that Roman Empire was causing for the Christians. Okay, so with that background in mind, let's go on and read about what he is trying to say. We'll just talk about that first paragraph, trials and temptations, with in today's meditation, right? So he's talking about trials and temptations. So he's giving his wise thoughts about trials and temptations. How do we need to handle them? What are those actually? How do we need to consider them? How you can edify with understanding these particular concepts. Okay, so consider it, second verse, consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. So the start itself is a bang, right? So what he says is like, when you are going through lot of tribulations, when you are going to a persecution, lot of persecution, not one, right? He mentions that many kinds of persecutions. He wants us to consider it as pure joy. So the starting itself, you would feel like, okay, what kind of guy is this? Is he kind of mad? See, there was one person I was actually hearing about, Ravi Zacharias, and he mentioned one story of a lady, I believe. Okay, so she will never feel the pain, it seems. Okay, so you hit her with anything, something scratches her, even blood comes out of, oozes out of her, she never feels the pain. Okay, I don't know if it is uh, a good thing or bad thing, but you are supposed to feel pain. Something, if you want to learn, obviously you are supposed to feel pain, right? So nobody wants that pain in our lives. But here, this guy is telling that you need to consider it as pure joy when you are actually going through a lot of persecutions, not only one, many persecutions. He is going on and explaining why do you need to consider it as a pure joy. It's like, what is his logic or the argument behind it? What he says is like, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. So what he confirms is that when you are going through a particular situation or different trials and persecutions, it is basically a test to your faith. So all these first century believers are, even we, when we go through, what is our faith, right? You understand what is our faith. We believe that Jesus is God, no matter what, right? Either you receive something, you don't receive anything, or you are going through a difficult situation. The only faith that you have is Jesus Christ is God. So when you are going through a persecution, when things go south, or when things go in our favor, when you are getting all the blessings that you are supposed to come get, or when you get hike in your salaries, or when you get good things in your life, it is very easy to believe and trust and stay tuned, cling on to our God. But when things go south, what do we do, right? This is our test through our faith, that the only belief that we are supposed to have is he is God no matter what the situation is, right? Either your faith, is it just like that he is just God, or you are behaving as a parasite? Parasite, reason I'm saying parasite, parasite, what it does is like it clings onto something and it feeds off something else, right? So you cling to Christianity just because you are getting blessings, or just because you are getting something else from God, and suddenly something goes south, something goes wrong, you are not able to receive all the blessings that you are supposed to. Are you moving on? Are you telling that, hey, this is something I cannot, how can I trust God? If he is a good God, he do these kind of things, right? So are you in a situation moving away from your God and faith because you are not able to get blessings, or because you see there are trials that are to you, there is a persecution that you are going through? So this is a thought that he's giving you, right? So not only it is just a test for your faith, and what also he mentioned, like perseverance. Okay, perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So he goes on about talking that it is not only a test to your faith, but it's a scale to your faith, right? Perseverance, what is perseverance? Basically it's completeness, or you go about getting mature, right? So how strongly rooted you are on the faith. Okay, yeah, very good. You are going through the persecutions, you're going to different trials. Maybe if you are in a position that you are able to tell God, Lord, I've been through this situation, but still I cling on to you. I still believe that you are God no matter what the situation. You will be able to praise your God and say, Lord, thank you for giving me a test so that I can measure my faith that I have in you, like how much strongly rooted you are. And he mentioned it very clearly, right? It will make you mature and complete, that and all good. And he mentioned that not lacking anything. So when you are going through persecutions, he mentions that you will not lack anything. So how can you justify this one, right? You are going through some situation where something is taken away from you. Maybe what is persecution, right? Something is not right. Basically, everybody will have a different level of trials in their lives. Okay, maybe something I'm very fond of something, it has been taken away from me. I might think, okay, that's a persecution, that's a trial that I'm going through, and something is not going right. So when things are like, maybe your wealth is gone, your health is gone, whatever is the situation, right? When something is gone, that is when you feel like, hey, I'm being persecuted. And what he says is like, you lack nothing in this situation. So why, how can you justify those two? If you think about, reason he mentioned is that the faith that you have in Jesus Christ is an essential. Okay, it is not a luxury that you can live. So the wealth might go, the health might go, or the people that you trust in, the people might go off, but the faith that you have, it's an essential. When you gone through this persecution and when it make you complete, you are able to tell that, Lord, there are other things that are vanished away from me, that are taken away from me, but the only thing that matters to me is the faith that I have in you, and the faith that I know that you are God no matter what situation. When you have that, you lack nothing, because that's the only essentiality that you need to have. It is not the faith is not a luxury, but it's an essential to Christian life. So that is where he explains about telling you will lack nothing. See, this is more like Bible, I would say Bible reading, and I'm not preaching a message. I'm just going on reading by verse and trying to explain what is the thought process behind James writing these things. Okay, so if you read fifth, if one of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. So again, it's a very good thing. Like I mentioned, right? He talked about persecution, well, good. Suddenly he shifts his gear and talks about wisdom. Okay, no matter how come wisdom come into picture when he is talking about persecution. Like I mentioned, right? It seems like there are different thoughts that are mentioned here, not like a straightforward a thread that is going through. May not be applicable for all these essays, but if you look at this paragraph, at least it makes some sense. Why he is talking about wisdom in this aspect is that, now you understand, James is talking about persecution, and he is telling you that it is a joy, right? You are going through persecution, don't consider it as something awkward, but consider it as pure joy, because you are able to gaze, you are able to measure your faith in that you have. And I might listen to that and say that, yeah, it kind of okay, but how can I still consider a persecution a joy, right? It's not wise. You might think that aspect. So that's the reason why what he mentions is like, see, if you are still not able to believe what I'm saying, you ask the decision from God. God is somebody who can give you wisdom, so that you will be able to understand the logic that I'm telling about persecution. So if you still are not able to understand the logic that I had mentioned about persecution, ask God so that he can enlighten you with this thought. So again, this is one of the misquoted paragraphs, where before every exam, people used to read and say like, God, give me all the wisdom because I need to pass through this exam. Or I know God is wise, he can give all the wisdom that he can, but in this particular situation, this is not related to the examination that you want to pass. It is about the fact that you need to understand these persecutions and trials are a test to your faith. If you are not in a situation to understand and trust and believe that, you need to ask God so that he can provide you wisdom, so you will be enlightened with that logic of understanding. So, and also he mentions clearly on 6, right? He puts another where condition, a but condition. But when he asks, he must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That man should not think he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man. So what is it like? Even when you want to ask God, God provide me wisdom, don't think like, don't have a wavering mind. Okay, have some confidence that it is something that you need to believe, but you are just asking God's grace so that he will enlighten you with this fact, that fact of understanding. So that's what he talks about persecutions, right? He mentions that it is a pure joy, that where you can measure your faith when you're going through trials, not to blame the situations, not to blame the God, because you are going through the situation. And number 9, he talks about the brother in humble circumstances ought to take pride in his high position, but the one who is rich should take pride in his low position, because he will pass away like wildflower. So he mentions about like, so again he's going on and explaining the same thought. So what he mentions is, the believer who is going through this persecution or the trials is in a humble situation, okay? But that humble situation, James considered it as a situation where you need to take pride, because it is a higher position, okay? So, and he considered like, but the one who is rich. So he is eliminating these rich people from the believers, okay? If you, if you understand, the brother in humble circumstance, and he mentions that, but the one who is rich. So he tells like, the rich is not part of the brother in humble situation. So you might ask a question, is it God, is it not God's will that a person can be rich? Okay, you might ask that question. Okay, why he is saying, but this rich person is not part of the the brother in humble circumstances? Okay, um, again, it is typically not rich person that he is aware. So when, see, if everybody understands the God's plan and follows the law properly, there is no rich and poor. Everybody is equal person. Okay, so God has created these 12 tribes so that every one of them are treated equally. Somebody will work in some way, some people will do some other work, but they would be given food. So that equality is always part of the kingdom that God is trying to establish, from so on so forth. Okay, but if you see, there are only like 4% or 5% of billionaires. Okay, the other day I was telling some facts, right? There is around 90, more than 90% of the wealth is actually residing with 4% or 8% of the billionaires in the entire world. All these earth resources are in those people. The other 92% are still fighting for the remaining 4% or 5% of the wealth that you have here. Okay, why are we in this situation? Because the people who are in the higher position, they think like, okay, we need to dominate the people and get as much as we can. So when you are in that situation, you are not believing the ideal of God, where you need to treat other people equally. So that is the reason why he specifically means, when you have this rich and poor, the rich himself he is considering as people who doesn't even understand God. Okay, so with that in mind, what he says is like, there is a person who has everything but does not have faith, and there is a person who might have nothing but has faith. He still consider these people as people who needs to be proud, because they hold on to something that is essential. But when things are taken away from these rich people, they don't even have faith. So they don't have all the riches in the world. At the same time, they don't even have the faith that they are supposed to have. That is the reason why he says like they will wither away from this kind of situation. Okay. So, and he goes on about talking 12th verse. Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. And then what he's trying to say is like, so when you go through the trials and the persecution and the tribulations that you are going through, you need to be happy when you have gone through and still cling on to God, because at the end you will be crowned for the faith that you have. So that is where he actually closes about trials. So we might have different thoughts about trials. We might be thinking like, hey, when Job actually was going through different problematic situations, people were thinking like he has done something wrong. Maybe because of that he has actually going through all these trials and tribulations. Okay, when you are going through these trials, you might think like, hey, obviously this person had done something wrong, that is why he is going through. So there are a lot many things that you can consider. There are different aspects that you can think when you are going through trials and tribulations. But the thought that James is providing is like, when you are going through this situation, consider it as very, you are lucky that you got these trials. Consider it as pure joy, because you are able to gaze, because you are able to measure your faith and how strongly you are rooted. So that's the mindset that every believer needs to have about trials and tribulations that they are going through. Then he is talking about temptation. If you look at 13, so now he is good, right? Now he is able to clarify what these trials are, how you need to take them forward, how you need to consider, how can you justify these trials, all that good. And maybe there are people who are thinking that, hey, I am being tempted, maybe that is also a test to my faith. Okay, maybe there are some people who are actually thinking that. So he wants to clarify that thought. He is talking that when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. So what he's trying to clarify is, what is temptation, right? When you understand about temptation, temptation is not something, some kind of desire, some kind of eagerness to do evil, obviously, right? It is not something, you will never be tempted to do good. When people say you are being tempted because you want to do something evil, right? So that is where. So what he says is that, just assume that there is a person who is fond of sweets. Okay, he is sweet tooth, you say, right? When he looks at the pastry, that is when he will be tempted. Okay, but if I really hate sweets, okay, I don't even like sweets. Okay, for some reason I don't like sweets. When I look pastry, will I be tempted? Obviously not, right? Maybe I might like chicken, non-veg. Okay, so I don't want to eat chicken, but when I see because I'm so much like chicken, when I see chicken I will be tempted. Okay, so basically the temptation is actually coming from the desires that you have rather than an external factor. Okay, when you like to do something, when you want to do something, that is when you will be tempted to do that particular task. Okay, so in Christianity, who is the tempter? Basically, from the beginning we call like Satan is a tempt, because he is evil, he is fallen. He has that thought in his mind that, hey, these people also should not believe, they should fall, or they should go away from the kingdom of God, and they should not receive all the blessings. So he has that evil thought in mind. That is why he is trying to tempt people. So again, just to make it that point very clear, that when you are being tempted, we should not tell, okay, God is giving me these temptations. God will never give temptations. That is why he is actually justified. We understand that God cannot tempt you, but he also mentions that for God cannot be tempted by evil. Okay, why is he saying God cannot be tempted by evil? As I mentioned, you want to tempt you want to tempt somebody because you want them to fall. Okay, you would have seen a lot of serials and a lot of different drama where People try to say that one person maybe likes something, and you don't want them to be good, you can offer that to the person. Reason you want them to offer is not because you like them, because you want them to fall, right? So that itself an evil thought inside you. Okay, so God doesn't have even an inch of or a hint of evil in his heart. Okay, that is the reason why James justify that God has nothing called evil in his. He is holy and he is good. Because he doesn't have evil, he can never tempt you. Okay, so when somebody is being tempted, first of all, you need to understand God cannot have evil. That is the reason why he cannot tempt you. That you need to understand. And second thing you need to understand is that when you are being tempted, you should not tell that, okay, maybe there are external factors, or God or some kind of divine factors are trying to tempt you. It is not. It is your own desire that is actually tempt you. So that is what James actually, as I mentioned, James, it's more of a practical book rather than a doctrine. Okay, so that is what you need to understand. So he talks about trials and tribulations, which the way that you are supposed to take, and he also talks about temptation, where you need to understand it is merely because your own self desire that you have, rather than it is coming from God. Okay, and he also mentions that now he talks about what is not coming from God, and he talks about what is actually coming from God. That is on 17. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all he created. So again, I'm trying to explain the thought process that he has in this particular verses, right? See, he talked about trials, he talked about temptations, and he is telling that temptations are not coming from God, and that is why he is actually trying to explain what is actually coming from God. You don't find a connectivity, but when you understand this thread, you might understand and appreciate what he is trying to say. So what he says is like, any good that is you are going through is actually coming from God. More of all, the salvation that you have, the rebirth that you have taken from the word of God, is a blessing that is actually given from God. So that is when he closes that paragraph about trials and temptations, right? So two things that we learned about: one, when you are going through the trials and the tribulations, are we blaming the God, or are we blaming the situations? Instead, we need to understand these things are a test to your faith, where when you come out of these trials and persecutions, you will be able to praise the God and give thanksgiving to God and say that, Lord, thank you for these trials that I have been going through. I am able to understand where I am in the faith, that in the faith aspect of in my Christianity life. And when he is talking about temptation, he also talks about the trial when he spoke about trials, he also mentions about temptation, that there is a wrong concept that people has about temptation. Might be thinking that God has given, or Satan has giving temptations. Instead, it is your own desire that is actually making you be tempted to do that evil. And he talks about the perfect that gift that you have is salvation that you have from God. So don't worry about anything. It is not a luxury that you need to have, the faith that you need to have in Jesus. It is an essential that a Christian should possess. So with that, I would just leave with all of you with one question: are you a believer of blessings, or are you a blessed believer? Right? So do you believe that all I'm supposed to get from God is blessings, or you consider yourself already blessed because you already received the greatest blessing in your life? Over to you, Stuart.